listening to How We Got Here. I'm Chris to her McClellan, and I'm joined by her, Christina Best. What is this Chris to her?
This Chris to her is because you have.
I have a typo in my name,
yeah,
which is
yeah. For those of you who are not currently on our video screen here, Chris to her. So that is your new nickname. Or at least for the entirety of this episode. At least for
this episode. So, and if you like today's conversation, and why wouldn't you, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing our podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast. And Christina, are you going to have the honor of introducing our guest?
I actually thought I'd toss that to you today, but before we introduce our guest, I did want to ask you a question, Chris.
Okay.
Have you ever thought about talking to strangers about death or caregiving, or have you done that? Just curious, given the theme of today's episode.
And I appreciate you asking that, and I have, and I feel honored that I've had that opportunity to talk about that experience as a caregiver. But I think, my comfort zone didn't happen until after I had been a participant in giving and providing a beautiful sunset to my partner.
Yeah.
Comes with experience.
That's for sure. And I think too, as we will eventually get to introducing our guest, but I think there's so many great resources out there nowadays for public dialogue about these types of conversations, like Death Over Dinner, which we'll get to, like Death Cafe, the Dinner Party. These are all great resources for folks to come together, really more or less as strangers, and I think find comfort in conversation with others and learning their perspectives on and their experiences around caregiving, grief, end of life, and all those things. I've had the privilege of attending several death cafes and a Death Over Dinner, and I just love it. There's just something about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. It's
hard to put your finger on it, but as I mentioned earlier, there's no greater honor than being present to somebody when the time of life transitions. But goodness, let's
enough about that.
Enough about us. But goodness, today we're joined by Michael Hebb. Michael is the partner at Round Glass and the founder of ELO.community and Death Over Dinner. His book, Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner, is available in the U.S., UK, Australia, China, Russia, Indonesia, Poland, and Romania. And goodness, Michael, welcome.
Wow, it's an honor to be here.
And I think Christina has something she wants to say right off the top of the...
Oh, yeah, I did. I don't know if you know this, Chris, but so thanks for teaming me up for that. But I don't know if you know that Michael and I have met. I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to just reminisce as old buddies who met at Endwell 2019 at the Death Over Dinner event that he hosted. It was such a pleasure when I think about my journey, as I've talked about in the end of life space specifically. There are folks that are up there at the top in terms of those who I admired and whose work I respected and read and consumed. And Michael's was one of those, along with Jessica Zitter, B.J. Miller, all the greatest hits. So this is really a dream to have you here today, Michael.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. But as we do with all of our guests, how did you get here?
Well, a long and very long winding road. Let's see. How I got here. What comes to mind, because we're talking about caregiving, and because I think invariably we're going to talk about Death Over Dinner and our new project, EOL. What is present for me is my father, and the lack of care, and my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was in second grade, which many people will assume is early onset Alzheimer's and try to do the math. But the reality is my father was 72 when I was born. And he was born in 1904 during the Yukon Gold Rush in a miner's shed.
That's a story in and of itself.
I want to go there too.
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother was born in 1865, and her name was Minerva West. And so between just 3 generations, we've spanned the whole modern era, which is pretty exciting and may become a book. But nonetheless, my father was diagnosed when I was in 2nd grade. And Alzheimer's was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And Alzheimer's was still a word that people didn't know how to pronounce. And they didn't know what it was. The 36-hour day had just come out. And we certainly as a family didn't know how to have conversations about the fact that my father was, suffering from dementia and quickly institutionalized. And the reality is, which I just read in the shocking New York Times article that came out a couple weeks ago, the percentage of dementia patients that are treated with antipsychotic medications essentially just turned into a certain type of comatose. Still happening, was definitely happening in the time that my father was being treated and cared for. And so from a very young age, I was present to some of the worst kind of institutional care. We were living in Central Oregon, in Bend, and the level of facility was far from desirable. And then in the family setting, there were not open conversations about the fact that how this is impacting us, how we're feeling. His death that was certainly on the near horizon, and that lack of conversation and the impact of his death and what it did to our family. Some of who didn't believe that he had Alzheimer's, didn't believe that he had dementia, thought maybe there was some nefarious, desires happening with the much younger mother, etc. So it was a real mess. And so I'd say how I got here and was watching this slow motion 10-year train wreck or bomb going off at the center of our family, and seeing how, and much later in my life, realizing after doing a lot of healing work personally and a lot of healing work with our family, realizing that open conversation about illness, about caregiving, about death, and our relationship to it would have changed my childhood and the whole experience of our extended family and the relationships. So I'd say I got here through the negative to the positive. And how could I make sure that no one has the experience that I had as a kid and as a young adult and young man?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodness. Isn't it amazing, though, when you think about communication, how life really comes down to communication and the fears that we have and talking about things that are sometimes taboo or not understood, and they're just kind of swept underneath the carpet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at some point I realized that it all comes down to conversation. And there's just different scale. There's just a different set of levels of conversation, and that define our entire life. And it starts with the conversation we have in our own head with ourselves. What's the quality of that? What's the conversation we have with our, the people closest to us, our spouse or our partner or our family? What's the conversation we have with our friends? What's the quality of it? What's the conversation we have as a company? if you're part of an organization? What's the conversation we have in the media and at the policy level? Because without quality, transformative, impactful, meaningful conversation at all of those levels, we're not going to evolve, and we're not going to become at an institutional level, at a policy level, at a personal level, et cetera. And so that's where I got really interested. I said, can I work at the level of conversation and impact the conversations that people have? And it's been wild to see where that, that's the form of communication. It's conversation.
Mm-hmm. Did you come to some of these realizations about communication and the healing work you mentioned earlier? I'm just wanting to go back to that and hear a little bit more about, before we, get into the professional side of your experience, that personal side and the work that you've done over the years, to unpack what you saw and experienced. Love to learn more about that.
Yeah, I would say, starting with the very personal, from that day that my father died, which was Halloween, I woke up in the morning on Halloween day when I was 13, and I knew that my father had died. And I had woken up in the middle of the night, the very moment that he died, was I found out later. But I ended up going to school that day because what else was I going to do? It wasn't safe at home. And it certainly wasn't safe at school. And I didn't talk to anybody at school that day about the fact that my father had died, which I actually think was a pretty wise assessment of the fact that the people that were surrounding me didn't have the resources or tools to take on that kind of weight, and would have made me feel even more separate from them. But at that point, I became very aware of my internal conversation with myself, because I was no longer just in the flow of a popular kid in American high school, right? There was a rift, and I was now having a very different experience. And so I had I was immediately othered, not in the way that some people are othered that is much more confronting, and I don't mean to claim that space in any way, but in my own cisgendered white privileged way, I had an experience of being othered internally. And that I became very aware of my personal conversation, and I actually turned to spirituality, to primarily Eastern spirituality and mysticism, to try to answer all of the questions I had. And ultimately, through the work and working with therapists and working with plant medicine and mentors like Gabor Mate, I was able to get my personal conversation, the conversation in my head, and this took 25 years after the realization, I would say, to the point where I have really nice conversations with myself in my head. I take very good care of myself internally, not just making sure I'm exercising and eating right, but how I talk to myself about myself. And that, to me, is a little bit the Everest of self-care, of caregiving. It's very, very difficult, and it takes a lot of work. But the reality is, once you do that work and you can authentically say you're nice to yourself, your life is so different. When you're yeah.
Goodness, I'm sorry, I got to jump in because it's what you just opened up here. It's kind of the key to self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would love to dig deeper into this because self-care is so important while you're in the midst of caregiving, and some people don't like to hear that word self-care. But this being good to yourself, finding that avenue and that path is just can unlock so much anger and resentment and fear. And I want to hear more. So I'm sorry to jump in, but
you have to go through and feel all that anger and resentment and actually feel it and sit with the discomfort of it, and understand where it's coming from, and do some forgiving of some people in your life that you feel like have failed you. And, I had to do some very big forgiving of my mother when I realized that she didn't owe me anything. She gave me life. How extraordinary. Why am I burdening her with all of these things that I feel like she should have done for me, based on my own worldview? It's like, there's no value in that. But that took a lot of work. It took a lot of letting go.
A lot of letting go.
Yeah, but I think that, one of the reasons why people have a hard time speaking to themselves in a caregiving way, in a kind way, is that we don't partake in experiences that actually bring out our humanity, or make it present to ourselves, very often. Caregiving, taking care of somebody, is not necessarily one of those activities. A lot of people can be caregiving and feel a lot of anger and resentment, and which is completely understandable. I'm talking about, what are the moments, have we designed our lives, or can we design our lives in a way that we get to see how beautiful we are? And ironically or counterintuitively, this is where the conversation of death comes up. When people talk about the hardest stuff that there is to face, the biggest taboos, the person that shows up is a person of immense beauty. And so, I've hosted thousands of death dinners and sat down to even tens of thousands at this point, probably, conversations about end of life. And what happens is people show up in their most human way, and the most human way is the most beautiful way. Just unalloyed, unabridged beauty. And those type of experiences, Facebook and our phones and Instagram and our work is very rarely offering to us, where we get to show up with this, in this kind of honeyed light of who we are. And so it's no surprise to me that we aren't kind to ourselves. I think it's a design issue more than anything else.
Oh, Michael, I feel like you're really speaking to where I'm at in my life right now. The learning to speak kindly to yourself, and some of those other big life lessons I'm realizing, like acknowledging that you're capable of hurting someone else or hurting their feelings, but that doesn't make you a bad person. I think that's another one I've been not ruminating on, but thinking a lot about lately. And I love what you said too there about, I think that what I was saying in my little intro about that thing, going to these death over dinner events or death cafe, that's the thing. Because when you show up to those events and you keep an open mind, you show up authentically and just connect, as you said, with the humanity of other people. And it's such a gift to be able to do that.
Yeah, when we designed Death Over Dinner and launched it, we looked at questions that would essentially reveal people to themselves. What are questions that you haven't faced before, but get down to the core of who you are and what you value, and kind of rip off the masks and the veils and the layers, which can be, people say that sounds really scary, right? And that's why I don't go to therapy, or that's why I do go to therapy and I love it, right? Like, people have different orientation around doing this work of exploring our layers. The thing about a death dinner, which, it's a little bit different from a death cafe in this sense, is there's an order to the questions, where it begins with honoring an ancestor, which is something you rarely do in therapy or in another experience, where you light a candle for somebody who has died and acknowledge them. You've just essentially put a cloak of safety around yourself going into this really challenging terrain. You have that ancestor with you. And there's no reason why we shouldn't do this at the beginning of every therapy session or any hard life experience. It's part of almost every indigenous culture and any traditional culture to bring in the spirits that have come before us. It makes perfect sense. We need some extra light when we're going into dark or challenging places. And then we delve step by step into these questions. Before they know it, people are saying things they can't believe they're saying in a group of strangers or their family members. And then they're having that moment of being like, okay, this is actually, if they're willing to see it, this is a reason to be kind to myself, because what I'm saying has such authenticity and integrity. And that's what we acknowledge. That's what makes us kind to other people, is when their humanity is revealed. It breaks our heart a little bit. It opens it up, and we say, like, oh my God, I want to give so much kindness to this person who's having a hard time or a challenge, or it's just immensely beautiful.
It helps lift the stones off the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had a friend who used to say to me all the time, he says, well, I have such a stony heart, but I really do care. And I said, well, sometimes you just got to be comfortable in your own skin. But I was thinking of him when you had mentioned this about the stony, people that believe that they have a stony heart, when really it's just a matter of opening up just a little bit and finding that vessel that lifts the stone.
Yeah. Well, and we need we need help, and we need community around these behaviors. That's kind of the next layer of conversation, or the next couple layers: your family, your friends, your community. What's the quality of that conversation? And, one of the reasons we built Death Over Dinner the way we did is because I feel like there's a real lack of community-based healing. We go to a retreat to have an experience of healing. We go to Esalen, we go to Kripalu, or we go up into the mountains, the quote-unquote mountains, and we heal. And our consciousness has changed. We have this amazing experience at this retreat, and we try to bring that fire, without it being extinguished, back to our community, and we try to tell them about it. Like all of us have had friends who've gone to Landmark or something like that, and they're like, my life changed and it was like this, and you need to come up on top of the mountain with me. So that's very hard. It takes a lot to try to bring back a transformative experience and share it with a family that has a certain dynamic, or a group of friends or community. Be like, I'm different now. See me, right?
Right.
Or you go in with your therapist and you do incredible work, but only you and your therapist know that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, and these things
It's so true.
Or you do that terrifying thing called couples therapy, and then you can actually change the dynamic. But it's scary, and one of the most watched things on Netflix right now. But nonetheless, we were like, let's have people heal in community, much like AA does and Al-Anon, and have them see it and be present to it with the people that they're around every day. And if it needs to be strangers or coworkers, great. That's also really powerful. But we wanted to change the level of conversation at that level, at that sphere. And I spent 10 years bringing world leaders together, and Nobel Prize winners and incredible musicians, and to have some of the hardest conversations imaginable around genocide and ending war and homelessness and houselessness and the gender gap, and really engaging some of the most powerful people in the world in the conversations that we think that they want to avoid. And the fact is, they became leaders because they're extraordinary at thinking about these things. As long as they're not being managed by a political, they're not, it's not on the record. So,
It's more personal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why people have become thought leaders in different fields, and what I found is the more difficult the question, the more challenging, the more taboo, the more infrequently we talk about X, the larger opportunity there is for transformation and human connection. So that became focus.
Very much so. And Christine, I'm going to repeat myself from a previous conversation we have. I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to share this bit of story with Michael, if that's okay, as it relates to caregiving, especially at end of life. My now deceased partner was very independent. He wanted to do things for himself up to the end, but it got to the point where he needed a lot of assistance, and finally had the ability or willingness to ask, especially as it relates to one of the taboo areas, toileting. We used to make a joke about it to help ease it. Well, he'd say, it's time for a pooperama. So we'd get up. Sometimes he needed the walker. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he needed my help, but he always needed help with being placed on the commode. He needed help with cleaning. And that was hard for him. But it got to the point to where those conversations the two of us had at that time were probably the most intimate, most meaningful, because there was no barriers at this time. And the reason I like talking to somebody like you about this, sharing these stories, because I think when we have that opportunity to share these experiences, those people who are listening to our podcast, they can relate to this because they're either consciously or subconsciously dealing with what's going to be the next step. And to be able to find that avenue to have these intimate conversations, whether it's in an individual setting or a group setting, really starts the healing process even before the life transition happens.
Definitely. And I want us to get to the bedside of somebody who's dying, and
right.
with years of conversations. But I'll pause a little bit and tell a brief story, Christopher, inspired by your Pooperama story. But I was when I was 17, my appendix almost burst, and had a kind of rushed to the hospital, put under the knife almost immediately experience, and it was a kind of complicated. The surgery was complicated, and so I was in the hospital for about a week in rehab, and I happened to be reading Thich Nhat Hanh's White Clouds. It's his biography of the Buddha, which just tells you something about who I was as a 17.
I was just going to say, wow. Before the age of 18, this does tell us a lot about your spiritual beliefs.
That's a good
where they
thing.
originated.
And then I was reading Andy Warhol's diary at the same time. So there was, I was interested in, the Himalayas and, Chelsea. So there was there's a lot of room in between. But nonetheless, I remember I had very little control over my my belly and essentially the bottom half of my body as a 17-year-old. And I remember just pooping all over myself in the middle of the night, and having to call the nurse in. And as a 17-year-old, and this unbelievable angel of a nurse, who was female, to come in and clean me up. And then for the next day or two, was, these nurses were there for me whenever, I did have to go to the bathroom and was on the commode, and to have them be right in front of me, looking me in the eye, essentially, while I'm, very audibly, pooping, as a 17-year-old is about as terrifying as it gets, and is about as humiliating. And I remember as I was like calling the nurse in and dealing with that first shock of humiliation, and humiliation is not the right word. There's a much more pointed word. The terrifying nature of this, and then I decided to just submit, and was like, I am going to learn from, like, I'm going to feel all of the feelings, but I'm also just going to fully submit to their care and have it be a thing of beauty.
Oh. Well,
And it was life-changing. It turned me into a great patient, which I know that might change, and I might be a terrible patient at some point, but I learned like surrender in a really powerful way at such a young age. And it was such a gift. It's really changed my life. But thank you. I never told that story publicly.
I appreciate you sharing that. It's very powerful. Submit to the care and surrender.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that with us.
That is very beautifully said.
Yeah, it was a powerful moment. You may hear our dogs in the background. It's still the Delta variant has us still in our houses, etc. So I just thank the listener. There is Yoko and Tootsie, is who you're hearing in the background.
Yoko and Tootsie? Okay.
Yeah.
They're making an appearance. They'll be featured guests on this episode. We'll give them credit.
But I do want to drive, since we are talking about caregiving and end of life, to the bedside. And I remember a dear friend of mine, Alex Benayan. I don't think he'll mind me telling this story. Alex has a New York Times bestselling book, actually an international bestseller, called The Third Door. And his father was dying with a very advanced cancer, and he called me and said, I need help. First thing I did was actually connect him to Dr. Ira Byock, because they were in the Los Angeles area. And I said, Ira, who always says yes. I don't know how these doctors always say yes. I don't get it. I don't know. I rarely say yes. And there's no way I have as much responsibility as these remarkable doctors in my life. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, you need to have Ira around, or at least on call. And Ira was there for him. And then I told Alex, you know what? You're scared of having these conversations, but you need to think about all of the questions that you want to ask your dad, all of the things that you want to know. And it may be 2, it may be 1, it may be 25. And I want you to write them down. The scarier they are, the better. I want you to write them down. And then I want you to go in and sit with your dad and ask him those questions while he's still, cogent, while he's still able to answer them. And this could be about a memory from childhood. This could be about what he wants his funeral to be like. And he did. And I understand, I understand the courageousness and the resistance we have to that. It seems antithetical to caregiving in many, many situations to, bother or perturb the patient or the person who's struggling with existential or painful or scary questions. But the opportunity, and people, you have to trust people to let you know that they don't want to do something or answer something. We have to give people that honor.
Right.
And respect, because they will show up and let us know. But if we don't take an opportunity to ask them the questions, there is a part of our heart that will ache forever. So just the opportunity, and And so that's the invitation.
Yeah.
That gets me right in my heart thinking about my most significant loss, which was my father, and that was 10 years ago. And I think you really hit the nail on the head in describing a feeling or emotion that I did not have a description for up until this very second. So thank you for sharing that. Because it is a deep aching and longing. Because I was a child when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I was in middle school, and I'm maybe similar to your story. When you're at that age, you're not thinking to ask your ill parent questions about their childhood or their favorite candy, whatever it may be, or existential questions. But there's that loss there, and well, anyway, this episode isn't about me, but
that's the beauty
it's
of it.
about all of us. That's right. Mm-hmm. It's about our shared experiences.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other rituals or habits or recommendations you would make in addition to these questions, whether you're, the caregiver or someone in that type of role, or if you're on the other side and you're a person who is terminally ill or suffering from some sort of serious illness, any other activities you would recommend partaking in to, enhance relationships and heal?
Yeah. Well, and I think that there are better people to have the conversation about the nuts and bolts of caregiving toward the end. And so many people come to mind because that have spent countless hours taking care of friends, loved ones, and strangers at the bedside. Koshin Paley Ellison comes to mind. Kristen DeLeo come to mind. There's Olivia Barham. Extraordinary people who've been present. A couple of things that I can share is that there is a tremendous opportunity for healing for the person who's dying and for the people that will remain living and the generations that follow. At any point, even when the person's dead, but certainly when they're still alive and they can hear you and respond, but even when they can't, this is the potential for healing in this period is so extraordinary. And it's one of the reasons why I think why we've instinctively want to take someone out of a hospital into our home, reduce the chaos, reduce the noise, and that is really because I think we intuitively know that the potency, the potentiality of this time period before someone crosses over, and during in many traditions for 3 days or 40 days or a year, that the spirit is very present, much more present than it will be in the future. But this is a period of great potential healing. And for me, healing is about wholeness and about becoming who we're meant to become. So when we say that word healing, it could mean a lot of things. And for me, that's what it is. For people becoming who they have the potential to be, and we can feel that potential inside of us. So that's when I say healing in that context. And then the people that come after us, the more we are able to become, the more they will be able to become. And that's what healing generational trauma looks like. So that's one, I can say that's the bold-faced headline, is to see it as a period of great healing, and which can include a period of great chaos, and a period of great sadness, and a period of great unknowing, and a period of all kinds of things. But it is also that. It's a period of great healing more than anything else. The other thing is, having talked to tens of thousands of people about end of life and their fears, and be, essentially a fly on the wall, and of over 1 million people sitting down to death dinners, which is a number we've surpassed. What has become again and again clear to me is if you think if any part of you thinks that you should stop your life and go be with the person who's in their last week, month, 6 months, hour, do it. If that comes up for you, and it's okay if it doesn't. It's okay if it's like, you know what, I actually don't need to be there. We're not talking about that. That is completely okay. And there could be a million reasons. It could be your mother. It could be your father. It could be maybe it's even a previous spouse. If the desire to be there is not present, then own that. And that is 100% okay. But if you get that sense that it is very important for you to be there, even if it means challenges from travel and work and etc., do it. Because the type of regret that I've seen in people,
oh goodness, yes,
who haven't listened to that internal voice that I should be there, it can be poisonous. And you can work on that. You can heal from those decisions for those,
sure,
where we weren't listening to ourselves, or life wouldn't let us. We can forgive ourselves. We're human. That's one of our great capabilities. We have thumbs and we know how to forgive. But like the reality is in the future. If you run into that, I've just seen people.
The reality is in the future. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Could you paint a picture on a podcast on what a dinner would look like?
Yeah, of course. The great thing is they've looked like so many things. There's death over donuts and death over dim sum and death over drinks and death over deli, all kinds of things. And we designed Death Over Dinner as this gift. It's never earned anyone a penny, and will never. And we made it an abusable brand. Like, make it your own.
Abusable brand. That's pretty good.
You will notice there is no TM near anything, no trademarked anything around Death Over Dinner. And it's always been given freely. But the way that the typical dinner goes is first somebody gets inspired, says, I actually want to have those conversations with my family, friends, and they determine who. They send out invitations. We give people language for the invitation because it's a weird invitation. And the first, challenge that some people might face is a lot of people will say no. It's totally okay. It's a self-selecting dinner. You actually don't want people at that dinner that don't want to be there.
Right.
And you never surprise people. I will always say, like, never be, hey, pizza night, surprise, death dinner.
Also,
yeah, this is not an intervention. This is
no. And people are like, Thanksgiving or the holidays is a perfect time. Since it's coming up, we'll all be together. And it's like, if you can just bust out a death dinner on your family at Thanksgiving, whether you've told them or not, and have that go well, then you definitely don't need to be paying a therapist. Like,
touche. Oh my God.
But don't try it. Don't turn Thanksgiving dinner into a death dinner. That's not what it's about. And Christmas and just, I don't even think the holidays are the right time at all. So it's just too charged for all of us. But nonetheless, whether it's family, friends, or you're attending one that's put on by an organization, it's a stranger, with a group of strangers, it always starts with lighting a candle or raising a glass or both for an ancestor, like we mentioned before, someone who's died, who had a positive, powerful impact on your life. And then a dinner will then go generally into a more common question that we've seen before. What is on your bucket list? What meal would you like as your last meal if you could choose? What song would you like at your funeral? And the reason being is that's kind of like an icebreaker question. getting people warmed up. And it can become deeply emotional, deeply spiritual, deeply existentially powerful, even when they're talking about last song or the meal. You never know when it's going to click with somebody. And then we go into the deep end of the pool. And people don't even know it at this point. We've slowly turned up the temperature, and they don't even know that they're in a very unusual environment and terrain, question-wise. And we ask a question like, if you just found out you only had 30 days to live, how would you feel? Which is, is a type of experience or question that only those that have had the most dire terminal diagnosis or mortal diagnoses have been faced with. And just to have the experience and empathy of knowing what it's like to even in a hypothetical setting go through that question is powerful. And then we follow up with, what would you do with the last 30 days? And what does your last day look like, and your last hour, and who's around you? And this is critical data for your loved ones. Everybody,
right.
Everybody's friends, closest friends and family should know the responses to these questions. We just haven't designed life that way. And then we tend to have a final question about what happens to your body, what is your funeral like, kind of how do you want to be memorialized, how do you want to be remembered, which again is incredible data for incredibly powerful information. One element of why that we don't talk about very often is if we haven't heard from the person how they want to be honored when they're dead, what happens to their body, what their funeral looks like, what we should do with the ashes, we aren't going to be able to grieve as in a healthy and meaningful way. We have that meaninglessness fog of grief of like, did I make the right decision?
Did I make
the right decisions? And so it's a real gift to tell people how you want to be, what happens to your body, how you want to be remembered, because it will help them grieve more meaningfully and for a shorter duration. And that is a powerful gift. You're giving the gift of less suffering to your loved ones. Forget Christmas. Just, wrap these things up.
Wrap these things. Yeah. Exactly. Because when you have this bit of information, it makes a difficult situation just a little bit easier because you're following the wishes of the person that you're entrusted in your care. There's no wonderment. Did I did the right thing? Well, if you know what that person wants, you did the right thing.
Well, and if we need scientific reflection on this, we're talking about moral distress.
Right.
And what you're setting your family or loved one up for when you don't communicate your wishes is moral distress. And my good friend Jack Saul, who's famously Esther Perel's husband, who studies PTSD and moral distress, has determined that moral distress is more impactful in our returning veterans' lives, more toxic than PTSD. Which, this is what we're setting people up for if we don't know. And this is what you need to be able to identify and forgive yourself and heal around if you have struggled with moral distress. And it's why it's so prevalent in our hospitals, because they don't, they want to give care that is accordant with the goals of the patient. And they often can't for administration reasons, for resource reasons, or for lack of communication. Right. So, there's so much in this very simple act, but almost most importantly is that we'll bring it back to beauty. And the thing is, when your loved ones talk about what they want to have happen to their body and how they want to be memorialized, you will see them at their most beautiful. If you can get them to talk about it. And a lot of us have very challenging relationships with our family. And we need to have more opportunities where we can see the humanness and the beauty in our family. And to take some of those stones off our heart when it comes to family times and family individuals. And this will do it. Having these conversations, you will see. I mean, my mother and I, we have been in a great relationship now, but I have never seen her more angelic than when she talks about death and her wishes. I mean, it is literally like a being of light has entered, it starts to emit from her, and it's an extraordinary thing, not to be missed.
Absolutely.
Oh, goodness.
Well, as you were sharing all of that with us, I couldn't help but think of the hypothetical but very real scenario for other folks is if you are able to, cross that line or cross that bridge interpersonally, whatever those relationships are, and the family or friends, whatever, do know your wishes, but then choose not to follow through with that. I don't know if I have a specific question. I find that's a sticky thought I'm having in response to what you're saying, and would love for you, if you have any reactions to that, to weigh in.
I do. And, there are many examples when it comes to families not wanting to honor the wishes of a dead or dying loved one. And they often have to do with sexual orientation, gender, and religion. And so there are things that an individual can do to make sure it's clear and binding. One is a health proxy, making sure that you have somebody assigned as a legal representative for you. And that is an easy form, and you can go to the NHPCO. I imagine caregiving.com also has resources for the healthcare proxy. You can go further and complete a living will or an advanced care directive. I think that the healthcare proxy is on the living side of dying.
Yes.
Is the most powerful document.
Very much so.
And way more effective than an advanced care directive that may not get seen or exercised. But that whole world is going to get better, and it's changing. But there is also a death directive. And you can make somebody legally responsible for your body and to make the decisions for your body. And it exists in a couple different ways in a couple different states, but Olivia Barham and Sacred Crossings have a comprehensive death directive that includes the legal form for someone to be responsible to make decisions for your body post-death. And that will ensure that your wishes are at least the big wishes. There are the smaller wishes of how you want to be remembered, and if you communicate that to the people that are closest to you, the way that you would want to be honored is very likely to happen, and will be meaningful for those people. And you can't control who gets that information if you take charge of it. So it really comes down to agency. And that's, people are like, what is Death Over Dinner about? It's like, it's about agency. We want people to be agents. And EOL.community, which is this massive platform around end-of-life planning and grief, etc., that I recommend everyone take a peek at. All of that work.
I will second that, because the website is off the charts. The ELO, they're both of ELO is just like off the charts.
Well, ELO Electric Light Orchestra is off the charts.
Well, there you got my era. That's so.
They were for years, but,
I'll be thinking of some ELO songs now tonight. Sorry about that,
Mr. Blue Sky. Okay, you don't need me to karaoke on this conversation.
EOL.community has immense resources. Yeah, and that's. That's the thing for me, is I want people to be empowered, to have agency. And that starts with literacy. And that's really what we're increasing death literacy. And as are so many people, like the Jessica Zitters and the B.J. Millers and the Elua Arthurs, and the list is long. Thank God. It used to just be a few,
and the
people.
Michael Hebbs.
Well, I do my part, but yeah, that's what we do.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to put you on the spot, Michael. What song would you like to have played at your funeral?
Well, I'm a real David Bowie fan.
Very good. Yeah.
And I think that I remember being in a cafe the moment when I heard Sound and Vision playing, and I had seen on a friend's Facebook post, one of the greatest lights in the universe has gone out today. And that was all he said. And I knew the combination of the song playing and that post meant that David Bowie had died. And I just started bawling, like uncontrollably. It makes me, like, I'm tearing up just thinking about it. And, I've met a lot of fancy people and become friends with a lot of fancy people. I never got to know David Bowie. This was very much just who he was and the permission that he gave so many people to find out who they are. To me, it was, so immensely meaningful. And so the song is a Bowie song, and I'd want people to sing it together. And the song is Starman. And it has a message in it from the other side, saying essentially, I'm on the other side, and it's okay up here. I want the children to dance. I want you to recognize what's been lost or how you feel about me. But I also want a little wink from the other side of the veil to say, I'm doing just fine up here in the stars.
It's beautiful.
That is a great selection. I'll be listening to that song this evening.
Well, another question inspired by Death Over Dinner that we'd like to ask you as well is what you want to have happen to your body. I think that's a question we haven't had a chance to ask any of our guests yet. It's a good one.
Oh, wow. Well, we live in the golden age of memorialization and what can be done with your remains. So there are a lot of things. There are a lot of options. You can be turned into compost, thanks to natural organic production and Katrina Spade's work. You can be turned into a diamond, thanks to Eternova. You can become part of an old growth forest, thanks to Better Place Forests. You can become part of a coral reef, thanks to Memorial Reefs. You can be shot into the galaxy, in fact. So there are a lot of options, as well as green burial, regular burial, general cremation, you name it. But to me, I think the most striking and beautiful memorialization I've come across and plan to have utilized for myself, whoever's listening, is a solution right now called parting stone. And what happens is you're cremated, and then your remains, with almost no additives, are turned into beautiful polished stones. All of the remains have gone from this powdery, granular, weird substance that sits in most people's that have them in their box in a closet somewhere that they've forgotten about. I think there's something like 30 million Americans have cremated remains, or cremains as they're called in the industry, sitting in a closet in the box that they got them from the crematorium from, which is a bit odd, and speaks to the fact that we don't have knowledge or good solutions. But it takes cremated remains and turns them into these literally stunning polished stones, that about 30 stones, give or take how much volume you are. And then those can be handed out. They can be held. They can be cherished. They can be thrown away. They can be forgotten. They can be taken to things. And I think that that's a really powerful way to be able to give many people the opportunity to have, a part of you, or to, have some way of remembering you that's tactile and palpable, or a thing to take somewhere. I don't know who's been watching, White Lotus, but one of the great show, and one of the things Jennifer, what's her name, Coolidge's character, trying to throw her mom's remains into the water, and it always gets back on you,
always.
People, yeah. There's some romance in that, but also just hey, it's much easier to have a beautiful stone and toss it into a body of water or leave it on top of a mountain.
Absolutely. Man, I feel like it's either White Lotus or 9 Perfect Strangers. I've been watching 9 Perfect Strangers. I feel like you're either Team White Lotus or, 9 Perfect Strangers. But this might be a zany off-the-wall question, but I'm just going to ask it. We've been a lot of stone analogies today, and I'm thinking of how I've seen stones utilized or represented, especially when we're referring to more Eastern inspired meditative practices. If there's an article about yoga, there might be the image of the stacked stones, and so I'm just curious for you in sharing that with us, what that relationship is between stones and more of that spirituality. I don't know that I know the connection.
Yeah, well, I think that the practice of stacking stones, which has there's a Zen name for it, which I can't remember. There is a quality of presence that is required for you to effectively balance and stack, multiple stones on top of each other, because they're not flat, or they're a variety of. So finding just being present to the substance of the stone creates a quality of mind where you really can't be thinking about anything else. So the meditation, the meditative quality that comes as part of that practice is an easy, achievable way for even a child or somebody who has an unruly brain to get them to be focused and still in some sense. So that's that relationship. There's this idea of writing something in stone, this idea of something that has a permanence yet an impermanence about it, is a great analogy for the sacred, right? We practice rituals on a rock spiraling through space. We take things very seriously, with a understanding that there's maybe a cosmic joke or there's an unknowing at the root of it. So this kind of tension between permanence and impermanence, I think the stone has that quality thing. Like, is it written in stone? Well, we all know stone can be, it is not eternal. Yet we do use it for our epitaphs, and we do use it for memorialization. So it has that wink in it as well. And we do need to take things with a level of seriousness and intentionality, and earnestness, for them to work. For a ritual to work, you have to take it seriously. You don't even need to believe all of the whatever, if there's any dogma attached to the ritual or et cetera.
Right.
You don't have to take in all of the quote unquote meaning of any ritual, but you do have to take it seriously for it to do its work. And its work is, to put us back into, essentially for us to understand that we're small. We're part of something much bigger. So that's something. I mean, I could spend the next hour just giving you stone analogies.
Sure.
I'll stop there.
That'll be another segment. Thank you
that
for
we
sharing that. I truly didn't know that. So that was
Maybe
enlightening.
we will turn on Electric Light Orchestra and play the song "Here to Stones."
It's coming
But
full circle, folks.
Coming full circle. That's what we do here on How We Got Here. So, Michael, this is just a delight visiting with you.
Likewise. Thanks so much for
Yeah,
having
we
me.
went some unexpected
We could just talk
places.
all day.
I loved it.
But is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything that we've left unsaid that that audience would like to know?
Yeah, this is an audience that's come to a podcast about caregiving, and I'll go back to where we began. I would ask you to check in on how kind you are to yourself, and to prioritize that work, and literally to make it your number one priority in your life is to become kind to yourself. And that's what I would leave it. There's plenty of pathways to that, and we've talked about a few.
I truly feel like you're speaking directly to me, but also I think that's great advice for everybody.
Be kind to yourself. That is good words of wisdom. So, Michael, let everybody know how they can find out more information about you and all your wonderful programs.
Yeah, well, the best places are, eol.community, which is the URL. You can just type that into your browser. You'll find me there hosting gatherings and conversations like this all the time. And Death Over Dinner is ongoingly a tool for anyone who can go through the process and download. We're on the various social media platforms. I personally am not, but yeah.
That's practicing self-care. That's good.
Seriously. Oh my gosh. If marketing and content were not my job, I would not have the social media presence I do.
It's a necessary evil. Well, Michael, thank you so much for the great work you're doing, for sharing your wisdom with us today. I'll look forward to more conversations with you down the road.
Me as well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.